Here we go. All right. Well, welcome back. This is the September 24, 2018 special meeting of the Stillwater City Council and the Stillwater City Planning Commission. I will call this joint meeting to order, and we will get started. Thank you all, members of the Planning Commission, for being here tonight on
Thanks for inviting us.
your off night, as it is, but we appreciate you being here. We do have a short presentation from Mr. Dorman on sort of the council and planning commission and how it all works together, and we'll start with that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, a little context to kind of get the discussion rolling here. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir with both groups here, but obviously, as you know, before cities can exercise land use regulation, they're required either by statute or by the various constitutional and other authorities that are out there to do a number of things. And so basically you can do planning and land use by statute, or if you're like Stillwater, you can do it under authority under a home rule. And I'll kind of get into that in a minute. But basically, there's three things that has to happen before a city can exercise any kind of land use regulation. First, you have to adopt a comprehensive plan. That's job one. A plan that basically lays out a vision for how the community is to develop over time, and various and sundry other things that are related to that. The plan is the basis, the absolute basis for all of your regulations that follow, your zoning text, your map, and all of the corollary statutes and ordinances that follow that. Secondly, you have to have a planning commission, a body that is able to actually go through and make recommendations to the governing body with respect to both text amendments and map amendments, and obviously the appropriateness of both in those contexts, and to assist with the development of a comprehensive plan. It's kind of interesting, in the statute it doesn't really specify which comes first, the planning commission or the comprehensive plan, but the statutes do say that before you can draw up a map, which is the first step in enacting the text amendments that are developed by the comprehensive plan, you absolutely have to have a planning commission in place. And but the bottom line is that you have to have both. They are absolutely necessary before you can engage in any kind of land use regulation. The other thing that we probably won't really talk about much tonight is you have to have a board of adjustment. And the board of adjustment has a very important role in that. If the text amendments or the text provisions that are within your zoning and land use regulations cannot be applied in a literal fashion, it is a safety valve that allows the variance of that in certain context. If you can show that certain criteria can be met, then this Board of Adjustment has the ability to allow some leeway in the literal application of planning provisions. And so they play a very critical role, but we're not going to really cover that part tonight. In the context of the city of Stillwater, we don't zone here just by statute. In fact, the city charter, Article 12, adopts the inherent power of communities, of home rule communities, to engage in land use planning and regulation. And so being a home rule community, you have more latitude than a pure statutory city would have in this context. The legislature, although the statutes that allow the creation of land use planning and zoning and so forth are, I'm trying to think of the word that Paul and I were using, enabling, I guess, in context. They're not real directory. They're not specific as to what you must do in the context of creating land use regulations, but they do enable you to adopt that. So even statutory cities like Broken Arrow and Jenks have a fair amount of latitude under the statutes. But if you are a home rule city, you're not bound by anything that's in the statutes that is directory in nature, and because planning and land use is one of those few areas that's left that the states have not been able to come in and engage in any kind of effective preemption. So anyways, the bottom line is that in Stillwater, we have both. We do it under the Constitution and under the statutes. So we have the maximum degree of ability possible to engage in these types of practices. Statutorily, or under any other scheme that you might say, land use regulation is a collaborative and involves both collaborative and individual processes. In that context, collaboratively, this Planning Commission and the City Council established land use policies and practices. And they do that through the adoption of a comprehensive plan. Sometimes that's also done with a special committee that is comprised of citizens from the community as well, besides the Planning Commission and or the City Council. But the plan, again, it being the basic document that forms your foundation for land use and planning, is probably the key collaborative effort that the council and the Planning Commission engage in. They also do the text provisions. Every text provision that's in the Land Development Code starts first in the Planning Commission. It gets vetted there, and a recommendation is formed, and then it comes forward to the City Council, who then runs it through another vetting process. And if the two can agree, then normally that results in an ordinance that becomes part of the Land Development Code. The zoning map, where are you going to apply these things? What are the proper zones? What parts of town is a particular use appropriate in? Or if you're doing a revision to the map, is it a change in use from the original zoning map that is appropriate in this particular context? It starts with the Planning Commission. Every one of these, the Planning Commission vets it fully, and then it comes to the City Council and it gets vetted again. So again, this collaboration is absolutely critical to the process. There are other codes that are even related to the Land Development Code and the zoning regulations that from time to time will work their way through the Planning Commission. And so those recommendations go up to the City Council. So this collaborative process is important. But even at a higher level, I don't know when I say higher, not necessarily in a legal sense, but in a very broad policy sense, the City Council has adopted a strategic plan. And in that strategic plan, there are things that are specific as to land use and how the council envisions the city as being a very livable, functional place to live. Things in the strategic plan that make Stillwater the great place to live that it is. And those relate back to the comprehensive plan and to the Land Development Code. So, the Planning Commission knowing what the strategic vision of the City Council is important. And there are all these inputs into the strategic plan, and you can kind of see all of the different things that we've put in this chart here. But the comprehensive plan, the Land Development Code, building codes, street codes, stormwater regulations, environment, and on and on. The fire and prevention codes that we just passed. All of those things are part of the larger, are designed to facilitate that ultimate policy that you'll find in the strategic plan. So there's always this big interrelationship here. The other thing is the sources of those policies. And it's not, while we would say that the Planning Commission and the City Council are the primary entities that do that, we get policy issues our sources are everywhere. I mean, it starts with citizens, community partners, and all through that whole list that we have there. And there's an interrelationship between those that is critical to making sure that the Planning Commission and the City Council do create policies that are effective in that realm. So it's all there. The other part I would talk about is independent work. And that is, while you work collaboratively, you also work independently. And by doing that, it's part of what we call the policy implementation dynamic here that's on the next screen. But basically, you independently enact and evaluate individual applications, map amendments, planned unit developments, specific use permits, plats, lot splits, all of those things, those are individual actions, and they require each of you to work individually work separately to evaluate all of those. But in your work evaluating those, you always do that in the larger sense of, with the background of the larger policy things that you have agreed upon in the collaborative part of this process. When you look at a map amendment, you look at it in the context of the comprehensive plan, which is, as we talked about just a minute ago, kind of related back to the strategic plan. So all of these things are related. So it's important that you are able to interact effectively. And so that's kind of where we are tonight, I think, is the idea of talking about how to interact and how all of these things work together. And so with that, I would turn it back to the mayor and for your discussion.
All right, thanks, John. Appreciate it. I think, yeah, I mean, as John said there at the end, I mean, part of the impetus for a joint meeting is for us to be able to sit and discuss part of that sort of bigger picture of where we're going as a city and kind of what our direction is in terms of land use and how we want to collaborate together to move in a direction that's good for our community and kind of how we collaborate with the Planning Commission in that sense. I guess I might open it up with an initial question around how, whether it's from planning commissioners or from city councilors, around how you feel like whether you feel like or what you see as sort of our joint sort of direction that we move. Do you feel like we have that well? Do you feel like it's communicated well? Or what do we need to improve in the area of having sort of that overarching shared mission when it comes to land use and to planning in the city of Stillwater? Did that question make any sense? Do you feel like we do a good job of having a joint mission here?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would say about 4.
Can you expound on that rating of 4?
You know, I am so happy to be able to sit across the table, across the room right now, just to see your faces rather than on your the videos from the meetings. I happen to know all of you outside of here, so it's not like I don't know you, and I'm sorry that Dusty and Cindy couldn't be here also. I'm not certain that we all know exactly what direction we're going, and I think it was interesting to me to do a little tiny bit of research about what planning commissions across the country are expected to do, and there's way more emphasis on planning than just zoning stuff, and I think that's the trap that I feel like we get in. And as far as the worst times I've had on city council have been times when I have not understood how the planning commission came to a decision and have not accepted their recommendation. Those times have been really, really tough. So I have questions about how much how much do we talk about this stuff? Do we know do any one of us know what we're doing in the bigger context? Is that a 4 or am I going down to a 3?
Yeah, I was waiting for the positive part of that. That's all right. That's good.
Well, it's not 0.
Let me respond in a couple of 3 different ways. As the city attorney's already stated, Planning Commission vets things out. We take into account what we understand, the comprehensive plan, and what the council's action in the past. We've never had a joint meeting before. To my knowledge, we've never had a discussion on what your priorities are. I take your formal actions in the comprehensive plan and how you have done things in the past as your direction. I listen to what's happening in the Planning Commission, and I vote the way I feel, which is best for planning and the city. If you come up with a different conclusion after your vetting, I don't feel bad for 1 single second, because you know, and you're involved, you're the elected officials, It's on your shoulders to do that, and I don't have a problem with that. Number two is, yes, our planning commission seems to focus, and I don't know the history why it focuses on zoning and not citywide planning. We have a staff that does that, staff that's involved in that, and they bring things to us, but we're not involved in those day-to-day operations in terms of planning.
Would you like to be?
I don't have time to be. As you know, I have a full-time job
Right.
that takes more than 60 hours a week. So, no, I don't have a full-time job. I believe we have an excellent director of planning, we have an excellent planning staff, and I believe they're doing an excellent job, and they bring things to us to review the zoning near the university in terms of those 5, 6, 7-story buildings. I think is an excellent thing and will serve our community very well in the future. And that was reviewed, brought forward by the planning staff, and I just don't have time to get into the detailed nitty-gritty of that.
I would say, from my perspective, I think I felt like there are some areas in which there's more confusion within the Planning Commission about what our purpose is. But my general understanding is something is not brought before the Planning Commission unless it's already been vetted by Development Services. Like, they're not going to give us something to approve if they think it absolutely doesn't fit within our zoning and comprehensive plan. And I feel like my sense is our job is to ask questions, kind of get everything on the table that we feel like might be an issue, but also to allow it to come towards you, so that you have a say in it as well, because you're another layer of review and because you're the city council. So I think I feel weird when we vote something down, which rarely happens, because it seems like it's important for it to come to the city council as well. Often, especially because the public doesn't come to planning commission meetings as much as they come to city council meetings.
I wouldn't say they come to city council meetings all that much either.
I guess from my perspective, I can have a dream or a vision of how I want Stillwater to be and the types of businesses and things that are going to happen. But until a business person comes in with money that wants to do something, no amount of zoning or dreams make something happen unless somebody comes forward with some dollars to do things. So from my perspective, what we do is we then take, this person has come and said, I want to do X, and we then have to, in some way, balance out that without X, I'm not putting any money, I'm not creating any of this stuff. But at the same time, we want to do what's best for the community and try to make a decision that we feel reflects moving the ball forward such that you all can make decisions thereafter. Of course, you being elected, you directly to the people, they're going to come to you much more than they're going to come to me about something. But I have to, so I have to in some way balance out those two things, but realizing that I'm not creating any developments. I'm not building any houses, I'm not putting any businesses in Stillwater. All I can do is sort of figure out, through our discussions, what can we do that's going to bring the best overall outcome for the community on any given decision. And some decisions I feel like are difficult for us because they don't really play directly into our province or providence. That is, who is Stillwater? Where should Stillwater be? I really feel that's something that the citizens are asking you all to help them with. I mean, they voted you in there to do that. I, as a local community person, want to help bring about that vision in some way. But we're not directly related to you all in that same way, to the community. So in a way, so to use an example, how does this play out? So let's use the issue of water pressure in your homes, right? There are rules as to water pressure. There are laws on water pressure. What it's got to be this. And somebody wants to build something, and there's not going to be, and it's going to be really low water pressure, legal but low, right? Now, in one sense, I have to say, well, there's not going to be, maybe this house may not be built, or this building may not be built if I don't say, yay, we ought to do this. But at the same time, I want to be responsible to the citizens of this, that when they turn their shower on, there's something that comes out of the shower head. How do I balance those things out? Now, I try to make a decision based on what I feel like can work best for the community network. But as far as whether we should have rules about water pressure or not, that's not a planning commission decision in that regard. That's you all to say. And if you all decide that 5 PSI is sufficient for the community, in a way, it's not my, I feel like I shouldn't just say no to everything because I think it should be 35 or something like that, So in this tension between the two, I think a lot of times what we do, or what I see what we're doing, is really trying to play out that, ordinances, rules, things like that, and developers, people doing things, and trying to help work that process out. Whereas you all are looking at it from more of a community-wide type of a thing, maybe thinking about things that we're not going to put in our decision, or at least that we certainly, like Mike said, I think rightly so, that we are perfectly happy that you all are going to then say, we feel like this is the way it ought to be, and if the citizens don't like that, they can vote you all out. And rightly so, or for such, or rightly so in either direction, in that regard. So, whereas for us, they can apply to beyond the planning commission. We would love to have citizen involvement in our planning commission membership, but it's not the same.
Well, I think I heard you each sort of say, talk about this idea of needing or wanting or not having a great sense of sort of overall council direction on certain decisions, right? This idea of, well, we know what the ordinances are and we know what the rules we're supposed to apply and we're just going to stick there. But when there's some tension, which way do you go? Which way is the community speaking through the council wanting us to push? And I think certainly the comprehensive plan is the major tool for providing that sort of community direction. I don't know, when's our last community plan, comprehensive plan update, and when's our next one? Do we know?
We do not have a set schedule.
Okay. Do you know when the last one was completed?
2012.
Okay. That seems like a fairly long interval from our last comprehensive plan. Do you all have an opinion on being time to update a comprehensive plan? Would that help the planning commission in terms of its doing its work?
I think that would be helpful to review the comprehensive plan and do a comprehensive review to see what that direction, see if we want to change direction from the 2012 comprehensive plan. I do know that every item that comes to planning commission, the staff says whether this is in accordance with the comprehensive plan or not. And I don't remember ever voting for something that was not in accordance with the comprehensive plan. I do know there's differences of opinion on exactly the detail on the comprehensive plan. I know with Vice Chair, I know that sometimes it is hard to figure out the Planning Commission and their rationale. Understand that. If you ever want me or someone to come to a city council meeting, I'd be happy to try to explain that in any sort of detail that you so desire, and happy to be there and respond to any questions that you have on that. But yes, updating a comprehensive plan every 5 years would be a great thing. I can tell you we haven't done that at Oklahoma State University because of financial and other reasons, because if you're doing a comprehensive update and you have an outside consultant involved, it can cost you a pretty amount of money. So we've not done that at Oklahoma State. It'd be nice to do it, but if you do sort of a review of it to see if you're, as a council, you want to change direction in particular areas and give that direction out, I think that'd be excellent to do that.
Do you all feel like there's been a significant change in your vision for Stillwater since the last comprehensive plan?
I wasn't on the council when the last comprehensive plan was, I don't think, Pat?
No, no.
wasn't either. I mean, so yeah.
So it's an entirely different council, so maybe yes.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I think the city has changed. You know, I mean, I'm thinking of the 12th Street area that has caused us some conflict, and it's a different place than it was when comprehensive plan was done.
When were the form-based codes? When did that happen?
Those were 2014.
It was around the same time. The update of the comprehensive plan is what started the corridor redevelopment plan, which led to the form-based codes.
I think form-based codes were after I approved.
Yeah, I don't think they were finally adopted until 2014.
2014.
Because I would say in some of the moments when I've had the most difficulty on planning commission, whether or not to approve something, it's been around form-based codes and difficulty interpreting. Yeah.
Anything specific?
Mostly when developments have come asking for exceptions from requirements of the form-based code. And like, what was the spirit of the form-based code and whether those exceptions fit with the spirit.
That can be such a change, those form-based codes can be such a change from the norm that those requests for exceptions can be often, it seems like. I think that it's something we see a lot just in planning in general, that those can become a real challenge when you start to implement them, because they really challenge the norms of the community and what our developers are used to doing. It seems like this radical shift in ideas, sometimes a radical shift in costs associated with that. And I definitely understand the challenge of trying to balance that out when you have people coming before you with a project that may or may not pencil out, depending on those, what you actually will require in there. My hope is that the TIF will support some of that and allow for those variance requests to kind of drop off a little bit. Hopefully the TIF would allow us to support those parts of the form-based code that we think are really important.
Yeah.
I also think that revisiting the comprehensive plan, not only just from our perspective as council, but from a community perspective, can be it's important to get our community involved in that and hear what they have to say in that process. But I agree too that it can be an expensive endeavor, maybe something to look at a more systemized interval for how often we might want to update that comprehensive plan. Maybe there's opportunities to update portions of it. Maybe there's opportunities to bring in the community in portions of it, so that if there's specific parts of the comprehensive plan where we feel like the community has really changed, we can bring the community in to kind of get some input on those particular things and maybe do some revision and work on that part of the comprehensive plan.
I think we did talk about doing the, just the whole 12th Street section as a, whatever, first start piece or.
Yeah, when we started talking about that, we tried to talk about it as, instead of just looking at one piece of property, let's try to do a more community-wide discussion of that whole area. And for better or worse, that didn't go great.
I'm going to say for worse.
Well, for better in the sense that we've maybe learned some lessons about how to do that, or at least how not to do it sometimes. But I guess I'd be interested in your input from the Planning Commission on that idea of that sort of broader community planning, corridor planning sort of approach, rather than taking requests piecemeal, but saying, how does this affect a larger section? Is that valuable? Is it difficult? Is it in line with how you see your role?
I think it would be valuable in many cases. There's some cases that the individual rezoning is, you got a transition area, it's been zoned a particular way, you've got commercial establishments that are moving in there over the past 5 years, and this is right next. It's zoned on 3 sides commercial. It seems like we don't need a
Yeah.
corridor plan for that sort of type of development. But I think 12th Street would be a fine example to have a corridor plan, to look at 12th Street, to look at both sides for a significant different distance, so we can figure out and be together on what we feel in terms of a comprehensive plan in that area.
I think it's something that we see a lot of communities doing, these corridor plans, because we realize that our community is made up of lots of kind of smaller communities and neighborhoods. So it would allow us to maybe preserve the integrity of some of those spaces and really let the character of those corridors or neighborhoods really shine through in terms of how we approach planning and development in those areas.
And probably a little bit less overwhelming for a community person to become involved, because it touches,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Their
really what they
neighborhood.
live, it's their neighborhood, and so it's a little less intimidating to think about being involved when you have that opportunity.
Okay. Did you have another question you wanted to ask, Pat? Sorry, I thought you.
On a whole different,
Yeah, you want a different direction?
how are you feeling with 5 people on the commission?
Well, that's a good question. As opposed to 7,
7?
although I'm not sure we ever had 7. I mean,
Well,
there.
No, it's hard.
it's hard.
Well, it's hard in the sense that we can't always make it, and if there are only 4 people, I think it's, yeah. And if there are 3, we cancel it, I think.
No, we've had meetings with 3,
Yeah.
is my
Oh,
understanding.
is 3 a
As
quorum?
long as we don't have a vote on there that takes 4. So we had 3 last week. Whether we have 5 or 7, I was amazed that you had 20 people apply for this position. On the planning commission, we have trouble getting anybody to apply.
We should resend it out and see if they'll take a position on the planning commission.
I thought of that also, because this is kind of in the realm of planning commission,
I've
and
had a few, so that helps. A few that have voiced an interest since this. So,
Yeah.
I think it's the TIF thing seemed a little bit more focused. They kind of understood maybe a little bit better, and the planning commission is a mystery to a lot of people.
I
You know,
fully understand
I know,
that.
it just sort of-
And
you gotta go,
it's
I'm
a
not
mystery to
sure
a
what
lot of
that means.
people. It's, the city attorney went over, we need to be familiar with the comprehensive plan, strategic plan, and how everybody's involvement. And, we have 5 commissioners that have endeavored to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a lot of effort outside your planning commission involvement, and we're a volunteer
Mm-hmm.
board.
guess what?
And so, and every once in a while, we have controversial issues that last long periods of time, and people come and yell at us as well as you. So, yes, I understand that. So, my perspective is whether there's 5 or 7, it seems we have a tough time filling all those positions and getting all the people to come to all the meetings, because people have outside activities.
Is there something in the orientation that you think would prepare you more?
I mean, the only orientation I had was at least a year after I joined the planning commission. I mean, I met with Paula and Aaron, but a more comprehensive
A
orientation.
more
I think,
formal
yes, would be
education
helpful.
would be good.
I don't know what kind of material that you get. I looked up the City of Stillwater Planning Commission. Of course, it's just about maybe 5 paragraphs of what Planning Commission does. There may be a lot more someplace else. Then I looked up the oklahomaplanning.org, although that was written in 2007. But it's 112 pages, and I got tired after about 40.
There's a Vermont.
So did you look up the Stillwater Comprehensive Plan? Can tell us how many pages are in the comprehensive plan?
I could look at that, but I also looked up one in, there's one in Vermont.
Yes.
Did you see that? I mean, it's.
I've seen several before, and our what's on our web is sort of a global view of the Planning Commission, but we're supposed to have somewhat familiar with the comprehensive plan, which is several hundred pages, the strategic plan, which is over 100 pages, and when you go through that, you don't remember everything. We got a great staff that reminds us of lots of things. And of course, I'm not afraid to ask Paula questions, and she's not afraid to respond to those in some sort of proper way, and then I make my individual decision.
And also, Mike is very good at educating new planning commissioners. I definitely asked a stupid question in my first meeting, and he said, we're not allowed to ask questions like that. And, you know, I didn't know. So it's sort of a learn.
Well, the attorney was there, but he knows that sometimes I say that, and if I'm incorrect, he corrects me.
Can you guys have executive sessions?
I assume so, but I don't.
We never.
I'm seeing a lot of heads
we never
shaking.
have had executive.
No.
There really aren't any issues that would allow them to go into an executive session.
Would it be out of line to think if there is something that is a more challenging situation that you guys have to think of, that there'd be something that you could pull out from the comprehensive plan that would relate to what that, to allow some opportunity? I mean, 'cause like you said, that's a lot of information for you guys to try and remember, so I don't know if that's a...
They do that for every Planning Commission item. They have a summary report that that describes all that, that tells us, in their opinion, whether it's in accordance with the comprehensive plan, what the request is. They don't tell us, they don't provide us a recommendation because they're not supposed to provide us a recommendation. But they do go over whether it fits in the stormwater regulations, all those things. And then when we had the oil and gas drilling thing, that they were very comprehensive in all the information that they provide us, and we had long hours of public meetings where I was told I was going to be personally sued. So
It's fun.
But you haven't been yet.
I haven't been, and I told them to go after me. I didn't care.
What, I guess, what other suggestions, things that we could do from a council perspective or from a city perspective can be done in order to help the planning commission do its job better, or to clarify what its job is, or what other comments or suggestions would you have for us?
A counselor said our coordination, she rated as a 4. I'd rate it as a 7, because we're following, in my opinion, what direction we've been given through the comprehensive plan and other documents that you have. We're more than willing to come to a council meeting if you have questions of us. We're human beings, and sometimes we make errors in judgment, but that's why we're making a recommendation, you're vetting it out. I don't have any suggestions, except if you feel like we need to change an area, then the comprehensive plan or the strategic plan is that area. In my opinion, you need to update and provide that information to us, so both the planning commission and the staff know that direction, and we can follow that direction. Because everybody in the planning commission, everybody in the city council wants the city of Stillwater to improve and wants the quality of life to improve. We're all on the same page there. City council, your elected officials, tell us what direction, and I'll be happy to march in that direction.
The comprehensive plan is only 120 pages. A couple of them are pictures.
Was
All
there
right, I got that
something-
memorized now.
Was there something in particular that prompted wanting to have this meeting?
I don't, not that I none that I can recall, that this meeting has been discussed and scheduled for a long time, so I don't.
I think it was probably some of the 12th Street things that occurred, and probably some of the confusion and not being able to have the communication maybe between the two entities to figure out exactly what the purposes were. And I think the public had some questions too, and so we thought it would be beneficial to have a joint meeting that the public could listen in on and maybe get some clarification for themselves as well.
We'd be happy to be involved in
Valuable
it.
to talk more about the
Yeah.
12th Street issue, because I do think maybe we could learn from some of the breakdowns in communications there. I know I learned a lot about, at the end of it, how the things that had come before the Planning Commission came into being that made me feel very differently about it. I think all along there was a sort of a representation about community meetings that had happened and coordination between development services and the community that made it seem like what was coming in front of us was a very broad consensus of that neighborhood. And later on, it seemed like maybe development services had been uninvited from meetings of the community, and that was not a broad, coordinated effort between the city and the community. And I felt kind of like I'd had a wrong impression of what we were voting on. And I don't know where was the point at which that should have been clarified. But by the time it got to the city council, looking back, I felt like it shouldn't have gotten to the city council, but I didn't know when it should have been stopped.
Yeah, I think that I felt the same way about some of that information, and we did need to go back and do need to go back and see how that process was organized, and when we do this in the future, or if we do this in the future, it needs a more clear definitions of what's going to happen when and where and who's going to be there, because there was some confusion for sure on exactly how recommendations were made or who made them. So yeah, I think that's a valid concern, and one that would certainly address in further corridor development, community development sorts of planning. Other comments or questions on either that, specifically that instance, or areas which the Planning Commission could use clarity, help, anything else?
Are there other particular situations besides 12th Street that you've had some question or rationale of the Planning Commission? I'm very familiar with 12th Street, but I'm not familiar with. I know there are other instances where you voted in a different direction, and I don't have a problem with that at all. But is there other things you can give us an example of?
Street just
That's what-
sticks out as just like a really sore spot just on just many levels. And I would love to be able to do something neighborhood-wise differently in the future. And I'm not exactly sure how to separate all the threads that went into that piece.
I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I felt like my perception at the meeting where I voted for this that night is it had been vetted out, and the people in the audience, the vast majority were for it. So I thought this was a done deal, and then afterwards, people start coming out of the woodwork against it. I wish I had slowed down and said, we need some more involvement. Let's have a couple of 3 meetings about it. Let's Planning Commission go out in the neighborhood. And what I see is on a quarter type thing where several people are involved, we need to have significantly more public involvement besides just the Planning Commission meeting. That's one of the things I emphasize in my mind from the 12th Street.
I think just what you said, slow down. Sometimes it feels like a momentum develops, that there's a lot of urgency around an issue. I think it felt that way about Block 34 for a while, that we have to do something. Often when community does get engaged, it's because there's an urgency or a sense of urgency around something. And that communicates itself to the planning commission, like, oh, we have to make a decision. And we try to be calm and collected, but maybe some more institutional method of slowing down decisions might be good.
Yeah, I get that. At the same time, I think, we have lots of instances where people, when they hear about it, when the issue comes before them, they think, oh, this just came up and I'm just hearing about it, therefore nothing's happened to this point. We had these same discussions when it came to the TIF, right? There were months of meetings and discussions, but when it gets to you or it gets to that next level, all of a sudden you go, well, I hadn't heard about this yet, so therefore, maybe we didn't take enough time. And I know, with the 12th Street, I think Development Services, I attended a couple of the community meetings. There were a lot of discussions and a lot of meetings ahead of time. And so taking enough time, I think, is tough, because I think I would sort of look at that process and go, there was plenty of time taken. There was a lot of time that passed in the course of that decision-making process. Did we use that time well is another I think, story. And I think, maybe having the Planning Commission involved earlier, right, so that you've kind of seen some of those before it gets to you, because once it gets to you, it's new to you, and it's, okay, it's time to make a decision, now it's your turn, and you don't necessarily have all that background. I think the council is the same way, right? I mean, there are many times where we get something that shows up on our agenda, and we go, okay, well, I guess we're ready to make a decision on this issue, and haven't necessarily seen all of that background. I think the rate issues on building services and the discussions with the Builder Relation Committee and all that kind of stuff that's happened in the background, where if we weren't there, we don't know how much time and energy's been spent on it. And I think one of, what we need to do better is communicating better during that time, during those discussions, so that the folks who are going to be taking a decision or making a decision on that in the future are up to speed with those discussions as they're happening, and not just kind of dumped a pile of paper and say, okay, here's all the stuff we've done, make a decision. So, yeah, I mean, I think I have some tension around the idea of taking more time, because one of our problems is we take way too much time in a lot of instances. It's not that we want to move, we want to just do stuff without thinking, but at some point you have to act, right? At some point we have to say, okay, we've made a plan, we've discussed it, we've gone through these steps, now it's time to do something. We have a long history in this city of talking a lot and not acting as much as we should. We don't communicate great during that discussion period. And that's something we've seen both in the 12th Street project, in our TIF deliberations, in many other areas where we feel like we're doing due diligence and we're getting a lot of time and doing a lot of discussion, but people don't see it happening all the time, and so that we need to be better about communicating it. So I would say absolutely the spirit of that point for sure. I would also say, I'm sure Development Services would say, hey, we spent a ton of time talking about 12th Street, and so the midpoint there is something, somewhere to be found around how we communicate, how we're doing those discussions.
I mean, I think, Planning Commission gets our packet roughly 4 or 5 days before the meeting. And sometimes I don't get around to looking at it before the day of, and I should look at it beforehand, but you never know. Sometimes
Sure.
It's 50 pages, sometimes it's 2. I think with more complicated items on the agenda, it might help to have more time to review it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a hard thing too, though, when people get excited about something, you don't want to lose the momentum of their excitement, because too many times we have these great big bunches of people who are all excited about what might happen, and then it drags out, and then they're gone, and they say, our voice doesn't matter. And so how do you keep the balance of the excitement of the momentum, which may feel like urgency, that's not really urgent, but lot of things to keep balanced. I really feel sad when people are excited about something, volunteer time, and then it just goes away.
I think there's opportunity in taking some more bite-sized pieces. I wasn't here when you all were going through, or sitting here, when you all were going through the 12th Street, but I think an opportunity to do more bite-size planning is maybe more doable. It's more doable for the community, I think. Oftentimes, you get more participation, like Councilor Zanotti was saying, and maybe it's a little more doable from a planning commission perspective as well, because you're looking at a unique kind of set of circumstances, a unique zoning map, a unique neighborhood scenario that lets you kind of really focus without kind of the noise of the rest of the comprehensive plan. You know, a lot of times there's just pieces that need to be pulled in. Maybe that makes it more doable.
There's a book that Denise Weber loaned us about, I can't remember, vibrant communities or something, and one of the points in that was that cities often try to do too much at once, and to just pick like 3 little circles of a city that you really want to focus on. I mean, we've already talked a little bit about just doing a corridor plan on 12th Street or something like that, but if you could think of, I mean, are there 3 little circles that you could think of? We should. No?
I like big circles. I haven't read that book yet, though. No, that's a good point. I mean, I think some of those corridor plans, you know, picking 1 or 2 of those to focus on, a comp plan update, and the update of how we use the comp plan in general is probably a good circle to focus on. And then we've got a circle defined already around corridor redevelopment, the sort of campus link TIF area that will be a big focus for the next few years.
Are we talking about metaphorical circles or actual areas? Okay.
Well,
Because what I'm
this
noticing
book
from the
was-
terminology is like, we seem to be thinking more in terms of corridors than circles, right? Like getting from one place to another and what goes along the way, or campus downtown link. And
It seems like
that
that's
makes sense.
often, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of times planning happens that way because our street system kind of dictates it. So we kind of have this transportation corridor that starts to define the character of a certain area for good or for bad sometimes. But I think also you can see districts, you can see neighborhoods, and those might be less linear, potentially. But I don't know.
I think actually in the book, he described going into your central part of your city and picking 1 corner that you wanted to work on. Have you gotten?
I haven't gotten that far, thank you.
Okay.
I know what corner I want to work on.
You have a corner?
Yeah.
6th and Main. I hate that corner.
Okay.
I always feel like I'm going to die crossing the street.
That's an interesting point.
But, I mean, if we are thinking in terms of corridors, just as a mostly non-car driving person, it might be nice to think about corridors not just as vehicle transportation corridors, like different types of corridors.
I was happy to see BPAC as one of the policy circles
Me too.
on the policy sheet, because I would love to see us do nothing without BPAC involved.
And that's the Bicycle Pedestrians Ad Hoc Committee.
Okay.
I was waiting for my car one day on 6th and Main, one Saturday morning. I wasn't even trying to cross, and I was worried about my life.
Well, that is in the TIF and corridor redevelopment area, so hopefully we'll get some development in the area, and we can,
Um,
I don't even know if we need more development.
well, something in the area where we can do something with the money, right? We've also got the ODOT's 8-year plan, Highway 51 is part of that, which will stretch all the way from Western to Perkins, right, through that whole intersection. And so,
Haven't seen
what, we haven't seen their
plan.
plan? No, I don't think they're.
We have that
quite there yet.
scheduled, and I can't remember exactly when. January, when we could get everybody together
With ODOT.
with ODOT and BPAC and council for present, and our transportation folks, presentation of that plan.
It's the planning commission and planning.
I think the planning commission should probably be part of that. All right,
Well, I feel very strongly about that ODOT plan and what we do with Sixth Street, because we're putting millions of dollars of energy into creating this corridor connection between campus and downtown, and to do anything that makes it more difficult to get across seems so counterintuitive to me that I can hardly stand it.
yeah, that discussion about how that project goes, especially in relation to the bigger picture planning is important. And we need, as a city, I mean, there's a difficulty there, right, around ODOT coming in, and this is how much money they have to spend, and this is what they're willing to do, and if we want something different, I think basically it comes to us to fund it, and so we do need to have that discussion about what can be done, and making that fit with our plan for what that corridor should be. And, we talk, the TIF and discussions in this town for 20 years about connecting downtown and campus better. Sixth Street is the river that runs between them, right? And so we need to figure out how that reconstruction looks so that it allows us to make that link.
Well, I think we've done the first step in saying that it's important that we all sit at the same table when this happens and have that conversation, which has not happened before. So in some regards, we've come a little bit farther than we've ever come, by at least acknowledging the fact that we need to think about this ahead of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Other big picture items that we should discuss with the Planning Commission and the City Council this evening?
I think this type of dialogue should happen. I mean, it's awkward now because we've never done it. And we'll think of 10 things after this meeting's over, I'm sure, about things to say, but I think it's important to have, if it's once a year, if it's just some dialogue about just how things are going and things that have come up and that type of thing. Because I think there's been a lot that's happened. And I think being able to have these two entities have some dialogue of what we thought went well, what didn't go well, or just getting to know one another, because we don't have that opportunity outside of this. It doesn't take much, an hour out of our time to do this. And I think it starts us also thinking more in line of what we're thinking of and what you're going through, and I think it just allows some better.
And I would be willing to come on your night.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Next time. We'll come to your house next time.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, can I ask clarification of Commissioner Ross? I'm sorry, I didn't hear everything you said. You said when you receive the agenda packet and sometimes those more complicated issues, you would like more time on? Is that what I understood you to say?
Yeah, like I might like an extra 3 days to review a more complicated item on the agenda.
Okay, so those, a complicated PUD or other issues similar to that, you would prefer to have at least 2 weeks prior to the meeting?
At least 2 weeks sounds like a lot.
Um,
I mean,
At least how long? I'm sorry.
a week?
Okay. That's easy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Always practical.
I have kids, so my weekends are not very restful or studious. And so getting it, right before the weekend means I usually look at it on Monday or Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
I can say ditto to that difficulty sometimes of taking all day Sunday to read through a long packet is not always an option for me. All right. Further questions or comments? I agree that this is a valuable time. I think it's something we should look into being able to do more regularly. Certainly from tonight, just my notes on takeaways, looking at the comprehensive plan, and whether we want to do a full revisit or potentially just chunks of updates on a regular basis. Working to communicate better in the process of the planning process, so that we're not, you or the planning commission and the city council aren't necessarily just getting all of that in a meeting packet, but we've been updated regularly in the process going forward. Certainly sitting down with the planning commission as part of the Highway 51 discussions. And there was something else in here I was going to make a note of. Just in terms of getting more community understanding of the planning commission role, try to drive a little bit more interest in the planning commission as a possibility in terms of volunteerism, and also some of that training and kind of updating with how we get people up to speed, so that we feel more comfortable, planning commissioners feel more comfortable in their role earlier. Any other big takeaways that we want to make note of? All right. Any other discussion points before we say good evening?
I just wanted to say thank you for your service. I know I, as a counselor, sometimes go back and read your guys' notes from your meetings to understand the questions that you asked. And I'm always so appreciative how thoughtful you are in the questions that you ask staff, and the obvious time that you've spent on some of the issues. It really, I guess, it saves me time. I feel like you guys ask a lot of the questions that, and it's already kind of vetted when it comes to us, and a lot of times in a really thoughtful, intentional way, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Do we need a note for the public in general? We do have open planning commission seat. We do have openings on the airport board. There was something else. Is it just planning commission airport that we're worried about? So if you're interested in serving in these areas, please visit our website, apply. If you applied for the TIF review committee and were appointed tonight, please look at the planning commission, the airport board, other board opportunities in the city. We do need a lot of volunteers to make this stuff work, and we want folks to be involved. So please apply for those positions.
And Mayor, I would remind folks that may be listening that if they've already made a application within the last year or so for one of those boards, we would still have that on file. If they'll just tell us that their interest is renewed.
Okay, so yeah, if you have applied previously in the past, just let us know that you're still interested.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
The planning commission is attending your meeting.
Okay. Counselor Zanotti has made a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Liz, are you going to call roll for this?
I'll call roll.
Thank you.
Mayor Joyce,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Darlington,
Yes.
Councilor Zanotti,
Yes.
Councilor Jalowski.
Yes.
With a vote of 4-0, we're adjourned. Thank you all.